You are listening to The SynqUp, a weekly podcast discussing marketing tips and tricks to help you build your brand. We also feature interviews with members of the community that are focused on making impactful and positive change. Welcome to The SynqUp. All right, welcome back to The SynqUp. We've had a couple of busy weeks here. We had such an overwhelmingly positive response to the pizza talk. I couldn't believe how many people have stopped me on the street to tell me that they really enjoyed the pizza talk. So we figured that we'd probably continue to kind of talk about marketing tips. That's the idea of the show to really is to talk about marketing tips and tricks, right? And we really haven't been doing that. So today we're really going to be focusing on things that you can do to help fix your brand, right? To help develop your brand, to help make sure that people are aware of your brand. First thing I'd like to do, I'd like to thank Kyle Hartley. Kyle here was one of the ones that started the SynqUp with us. He has joined the United States Air Force. It's kind of his lifelong dream, and so he just went in yesterday to basic training. He left yesterday. So we're going to miss Kyle, but we wish him the absolute best, and it'll be pretty cool. So I'd like to welcome Erik Madsen. Erik is our operations manager here at Synchronous. He's a really, really bright guy, and he's just going to be great in this podcast. So first thing I wanted to talk about here real quick, Erik, was kind of the point of the SynqUp. You know this obviously, but sure. And I think the audience generally knows this, but the biggest point of when we started developing this show and what its purpose was going to be, it's to help folks, listeners, be more mindful of their pursuit of marketing and their pursuit of their company, right?
Sure.
And what that does is it creates more happiness, more success, and more freedom in people's lives. And that's really what we do as a marketing company. Is we do all these things so that executives, business owners, any organization really can have more happiness, more success, and more freedom in their lives. And that's pretty much what all of us are looking for, those three things, right?
Sure.
Something like that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Erik and I, and really the rest of the staff here at Synchronous, we spend a lot of time reading books so that we can always be kind of better at our craft, right? Kind of cutting edge, modern marketing technologies and whatever else can help us be better and other, basically bring that information to our client, right? And so, one of the books, I've read this book a pretty long time ago. This is kind of a marketing 101 book that I would assume anyone in a college course would know about this book, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty, I would call it core curriculum 101 type stuff.
But, if you didn't study it, you don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
So what we do, we figured we'd kind of take some of these books and digest them a little bit and kind of explain, some of these marketing tips, tricks, rules, things that people need to be thinking about, right? So the book is called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and it's written by a couple of, I would say, marketing gurus. These guys have worked...
A couple old schoolers, marketing OGs.
Yeah, and they have, they've worked with, I think, every major company,
everybody,
probably. This is in the, 80s, 90s, maybe even the 70s, too. The two authors are Al Reese and Jack Trout, and they're pretty highly regarded. I think maybe the only people that, might be regarded differently would be, folks that owned major ad agencies or something like that, but
sure.
Like a David Ogilvy or something. But really, these guys are
Don
pretty,
Draper, right?
Or Don Draper, right?
Right.
Exactly, right. So these guys are very, very practical in their knowledge and their experience. And so anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to break down, instead of doing all these 22 laws all in one show, what we're going to do is just kind of break down the first three, and they're kind of all core concept together. They all kind of work together. Okay, so let's get started. First rule about marketing a product or service is the law of leadership, right, Erik? Okay, so what's the law of leadership? What does it say?
Better to be first than it is to be better in a category. We think about examples like the famous example being Charles Lindbergh, right? First guy to fly solo across the Atlantic.
Right.
Who was the second guy to do that? No less of a feat. Nobody remembers who it was.
Why is that?
Right.
Because you remember the first one?
Who won last year's Super Bowl? Who lost it? Right?
Right.
And do that, go back 5 years. Always better to be first, right? So...
And it's actually a misnomer. It's not that it doesn't have anything to do with quality. You still need to make a quality product or service, but it has really more to do with its entry into the marketplace than it does the actual quality of the product. As long as you're buying the product and you don't, hate it, it's not falling apart or something like that, the leader in any given category doesn't necessarily have to be the highest quality, right?
Right.
So there's a couple examples that I started researching and thinking about that would be really great examples to kind of explain this idea, right? And the best one, Eric and I kind of did some research here. The best one we thought was the GoPro. Because it's a modern example of a product that everyone knows. Okay, so this is the great story about the GoPro. So this guy named Nick Woodman came up with this idea to do a mass-produced action camera, and so it wasn't released until 2005. I think that's when he built his first prototype, and it was just that it was a prototype, and it wasn't even digital. It ran on 35 It ran on 35 millimeter film, which means I don't know if you had to wind it or if it did it itself. I don't really know, but in either case, it was this old film camera, and you put it to your head or whatever. The thing is. It wasn't actually the first. It was the first mass marketed. Canon actually came out with the first in about 1985. They came out with this little action camera, but it was really intended to be for broadcasters, so that they could put it on a motorcycle or a bicyclist or something like that, and so that they could actually broadcast that content. But it was never meant for kind of mass production. Okay, so GoPro comes out and explodes. Their marketing was so good. You see the videos of the guy, you can attach the laser pointer, and they attached the GoPro to the cat, and they took the laser pointer and they shined it around. Sure. The cat went berserk. And that marketing launched that product to the point where everyone has one. Kids have them, adults have them. They're playing with them. They're dropping them off of whatever to see if they can break them. I mean, those cameras did everything.
Absolutely.
Right. And it was a total game changer. Right. So what happens is GoPro comes out, they absolutely take over and dominate the market. Well, all these copycat products that do the same thing come out. Right. And I made a list of the ones that were big players. Right. Get this. Sony made them.
Yep.
Vivitar made them. Panasonic made them. Olympus made them. Garmin, Zoom, Nikon, and then all these brands that you've never heard of. Right. So all these companies came out with action cams, but the thing is, what do you go buy?
Exactly. Everybody knows the GoPro, and every company on the list that you just rattled off is a massive corporation with plenty of brand power, plenty of marketing dollars behind it.
Resources.
Was not able to leverage into that market because they weren't first.
Right. That's a big deal. Now, it's not like they didn't perform. I mean, I'm sure, a lot of Sony, those Sony cameras are really, really nice cameras.
I'm sure they work just fine.
But they're not a GoPro.
Exactly.
And that's what when you ask mommy and daddy for your Christmas gift, you're not saying, I want that Vivitar. Actually, that kid might be upset if mom and dad gave him the Vivitar instead of the GoPro, right? And so, exactly. And, Alec, we use GoPros here, right? We don't use the Sony version. We use GoPros here because they're pretty awesome. They're pretty versatile. You don't have to worry about breaking it, They're, $300-400, and they're really great little cameras. They're great. So what's the first law? Law of leadership. Okay?
Absolutely.
Second law, the law of the category. What's that?
Okay, here we go. So if you can't be first in a category, create a category that you can be first in.
Love it.
Okay.
So what is that?
So let's go back to Charles Lindbergh, right? Charles Lindbergh's the first guy to fly solo across the Atlantic.
Right.
Who's the second guy? We don't remember. Who's the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic?
Amelia.
Exactly. Not the first person to do it, but new category, first woman to do it.
Love it. Okay. So we remember the first guy because he was the first guy.
Right.
We forgot the second guy because
he was the second guy.
And he's not the leader.
Right.
Amelia comes along and she's the first woman to do this thing and everyone remembers her.
Exactly.
And the rest is history. So, okay, new category. So okay, we were thinking of examples that we could use kind of a modern product as well. I mean, we ended up talking about digital products most of the time in here only because gadgets are hot right now. But,
sure.
I love the example of the BlackBerry.
Yep.
Okay, because cell phones had been around for a really long time. Everyone had them. Some of them could take pictures and some of them could do this and that and whatever. But BlackBerry, they kind of reinvented the cell phone. And I specifically remember, like taking a flight or something, and the flight attendant would say, listen, you got to stow your trays and turn off your cell phones and BlackBerries. Like, BlackBerry was its own category. You had cell phones and you had BlackBerries, and they were so distinctive with the keyboard, and like they were the first, widely used internet connected cell phone.
Yeah.
They were brilliant, right? So here's a little backstory on BlackBerry. Okay, so the name of the company that invented them was Research in Motion. Okay, founded in '85. I didn't know that. I don't think they were making Blackberries back then. They were making cell phones, and then they came out with this great product. It did so well that they ended up changing the name of the company to BlackBerry in 2013. So get this, at their peak in 2013, they were at about 85 million users, okay? 85 million, remember that. In 5 years, this is now 2018, we're down to 11 million users on the BlackBerry. Well, what the heck happened?
Do tell.
They were the first in the category.
Right. So where did our law falter here?
So they stopped being a product leader because they stopped innovating.
Right.
They could have, in my personal opinion, I think they could have dominated. But Apple came along and invented this iPhone thing with this beautiful touch screen, and it could do all this stuff, and you could get a bazillion apps. Do you remember those ads for we're up to 20,000 apps? I remember seeing those numbers and I couldn't believe it. 20,000 apps, you can't even imagine. And now it's at the millions and millions, I guess.
Right.
I don't know, right? So BlackBerry kind of got lazy, I think. They stopped really innovating and just kind of set back and let the money roll in, and maybe we'll change our product and make it a little better, but they didn't actually innovate anything, right?
Right.
So get this point. Okay, so 2018, currently Apple's at 1 billion users worldwide. Samsung, everyone thinks Apple's the biggest.
Nope.
Samsung, 2 billion users worldwide.
Right.
Okay.
It's incredible.
Compare that to the 85 million that BlackBerry had. So, I mean, it happens that smartphones became affordable. Smartphones became the way. Once you go with a smartphone, you can't ever go back.
Right.
So it's kind of a timing issue, but really, I think they just stopped innovating.
Well, yeah, and it's instructive because we sit here and talk about principles of marketing, but marketing is only a part of the pie, right? So, yeah, first in a category is great, and it's vital. If you want to secure a majority market share, to be first in a category or to create a category you can be first in. But that is not a laurel you can rest on and say, I'm first, so I don't have to do anything
Right,
anymore.
exactly, right. Yep.
So let the woeful tale of BlackBerry be your lesson in...
It's too bad. I had a BlackBerry, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
They were. There was that moment where
boom,
that was the thing to have.
And then it fell apart almost as soon as it got popular. It was crazy.
I'll never forget they first came out. The first time I got an email from somebody with the tag sent from my BlackBerry, and man, I felt so behind and old I'm sitting here on this clunky desktop reading from my BlackBerry.
Someone sent this from their car. How do they do this? All right, so third law of marketing is the law of the mind. And this is probably my favorite one of these three. So, Eric, what is the law of the mind?
Well, of the three we were talking about today, I think it's the most instructive and most useful. The law of the mind is it's more important to be first in the mind than it is to be first in the market. And you kind of alluded to this at the beginning when you talked about the GoPro, because the GoPro was not technically the first action camera on the market, right? So this isn't so much a separate principle as it is a modifier of that law of leadership principle. That, it's important to be first in the category, but it's much more important to be perceived as being the first into a category in the consumer mind than it is to actually be.
Because that's what marketing is, right?
Exactly.
It's not a battle of products. It's a battle of psychology.
Right.
It's a battle of perception and what people think of when they think of these products, right?
Sure.
And that goes back to the first law of leadership is that it's better to be first than it is to be better. And so people have to get away from this idea that quality and service is our first priority. Well, of course it is, but that doesn't sell products.
Well, the trouble is it can't sell products because it has no opposite that anyone would advertise, right? It goes without saying your product has to be good or your service has to be good. That goes without saying, but you can't just advertise our product is great because that has no credibility because no one is going to make an ad that says our product isn't
terrible.
Great.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so I found these great examples. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm just going to see if you can guess what they are, okay?
Me?
Yeah.
Here we go.
You and the general audience, okay? So has anyone ever heard of the Seihan Eager MP Man? It was a product that came out in 1997, the MP Man.
Nope.
Made by a Korean company called Seihan, and then I think some sort of American counterpart picked it up and called it the Eager MP Man, 97. Okay. How about the Diamond Rio?
Nope.
1998. Never heard of that product?
Never.
Okay. How about the compact Hongo personal jukebox?
No, but I think I see where you're going.
Okay.
Okay.
That was product 1998. Can anyone guess where we're going here? Apple iPod came out in 2001 and absolutely destroyed all of those MP3 players. Those MP3 players, even the early ones, they didn't have a ton of storage, but they were still pretty good MP3 players.
Sure.
But the problem is they were really poorly marketed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clearly.
They were never the product leaders because no one has ever heard of these products. As a matter of fact, I had, and I started researching and like the history of the MP3 player and all these. I couldn't believe all these products that came out that were like.
What was that first one you mentioned? 1997?
Yeah.
And 2001 for the iPod.
Correct.
So this product
4
that
years.
is completely ubiquitous.
Yeah.
4 years late
Yep.
to the party.
Yep.
And is still managed
Yep.
to be the MP3 player.
Yep. Now I think the number two. I couldn't find information about this, but I think the number two company here was the Zune, the Microsoft Zune that came out in 2004.
Sure.
The only reason I think that is because that's the only one that everyone else seemed to have. You either had an iPod or you had the Zune, and then you had a handful of other, late players in the game that had a little bit of market share, but not really.
Sure.
Now, from what I understand, all of my friends that had Microsoft Zunes actually wanted iPods, and they ended up getting the Zune instead. I never had one, but they did look nearly as fun as the iPod. But here's the thing. Okay, so let's go back to this. It's better to be first in the mind than it is to the marketplace. This is such a great example. All these products came out and didn't occupy any real estate in the consumer's mind.
Right.
iPod came out, and Apple they did have a leg up because they had all these marketing resources, brilliant marketing resources behind them. They had a credible name and brand. We can get into that later. They had all these things behind them that when they were ready to launch the product, it launched hot, right?
Right.
Their ads were great. Remember the animations of people dancing with the eyes,
silhouette,
buds?
the white silhouette.
That was huge, right? And to the public, a product like this had never existed before. It was the first time that you could get all of your music on this little device, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows the rest of the story. They were so good at occupying that position in the mind of the consumer. Again, it's back to a psychological pursuit is marketing and not a battle of products.
Well, and I think that's a good time to bring up now every example we've used today, all our primary examples, the iPod, the GoPro, the BlackBerry.
Right.
These are three products in particular of plenty of examples. These are all products that have achieved like a generic trademark status.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are products that are like the trademarked name of the product in the
Becomes
consumer
synonymous.
mind is synonymous with, no one talks about an MP3 player. It's an iPod.
Right, exactly.
No one says, pass me a tissue. It's a Kleenex.
Right.
No one says, pass me a cotton swab. It's a Q-tip. It's one thing to occupy a primary or a majority space in market share or in the consumer consciousness. But when you control it to that extent, that I would have to call that the holy grail of marketing, right?
Absolutely. That's what all marketers are trying to do, is to make their product that they're representing the household generic name.
Right.
Right. That you just call it that. The Band-Aid, the Q-tip, the Kleenex, the Scotch tapes.
The generic trademarks
The
of the world.
Velcros, actually. I didn't even think of Velcro, and you mentioned that to me earlier, and I was like, wow, I didn't even think about it. But yeah, Velcro is a thing.
Well,
right?
Velcro is kind of a cool one because not only is it a brand name, but it'd be difficult to describe. Like
Without
I
using
guess
the
it's
word
this,
Velcro.
This setup of cottony stuff and plastic hooks with adhesive. No, it's Velcro.
Right, exactly,
But-
right. So Band-Aid, that's another one, right? So there is a term to define when a brand becomes the generic name for the product, right?
Sure.
For the type of product. And so you're the Mr. Vocabulary guy. What's the name of that term?
So the big word is proprietary eponym.
Proprietary eponym, okay.
Just refers to any time a trademark name basically achieves generic status.
Right.
But-
It's a very, very, very difficult thing to do that. You have to be the leader. And all of you, really, you have to be the product leader in order to do that. You have to be first. I mean, Band-Aid was the first at well-known, clearly defined adhesive bandage strip, right? Period. And so they did such a great job of marketing this brand new idea that what else would you call it? You don't call it an adhesive bandage, do you? No one does.
Right.
Okay, so a couple things here. When we talk about, we're trying to help people find more happiness, more success, and more freedom, in this particular case in their companies or in their products, services, we're talking about some pretty big ideas here, right? These are concepts that we're talking about gigantic national products, right? Well, how do you take these concepts and make a takeaway out of it that a smaller local, firm could do that,
Sure.
And actually we've talked about this a lot. Part of our difficulty here at Synchronous is that, we meet a lot of small companies, small firms, small manufacturers that they don't understand how to properly get themselves to market. We see it all the time.
Right.
And so I wanted to give away some takeaways here that like anyone really can use, right? It's kind of a problem in Southern Wisconsin, and we're trying to kind of help people to know these things implicitly, right? Okay, so let's talk about some takeaways here.
Sure. Well, it's easy enough for a couple of marketing guys. I mean, I think it's almost cliche at this point to hold out the Apples and Nikes of the world as paragons of brand power, right? It's easy enough to sit here and talk about, as you said, these big fundamental principles and use these monolithic brand examples.
Right, exactly.
So, rubber to road, what are we talking about here,
Yeah.
right? The three principles we mentioned today, the law of leadership, law of the category, law of the mind. What we're talking about are your differentials in your
Right.
marketing, right? Your differentiators. What makes you different than your competitors? But here's the rub, and here's what we're talking about today. It's really easy and not entirely incorrect to get caught up in what sets me apart from my competition in terms of what features does my product have
Right.
that my competitors doesn't.
Right.
What services do I offer that my competitors don't? I'm not going to suggest that those things aren't important, but that's not marketing.
That's not how you sell
Your
something.
product has to be superior. That goes without saying. When we
Right.
talk about your differentiators, we're not talking about the specific nuts and bolts on your product. We're talking about what differentiates you from your competitors in public perception. How
Right.
do people feel differently about you? What are you doing? What ownership, what deliberate steps have you taken in your marketing to make sure that people look at you differently than they look at your competitors?
Right. It's about owning that place in the mind, right? When people
Exactly.
see, when they see the mark, they see the logo, they automatically think of what that brand is, what right? And that's where that position is occupied in the brain, in the mind, right?
Sure.
And it's really important to clearly be able to define that. Right. So when you're communicating with your potential customer, it doesn't matter what product, service, none of it really matters. All that matters is you're clearly communicating that to the end user. Right.
Of course.
Really, I think the sum up here is better products don't sell.
Right.
Better products don't sell.
Yeah.
I think we covered that pretty good. I love talking about these books because, I mean, like I said, this is kind of marketing 101. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just kind of discussing the wheel. Right.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So next time we're going to get into the next set of rules, and we're going to get some great examples going. We're so happy to have Erik here. We wish Kyle the best, and thanks for tuning into the SynqUp. We've had some really great response. People are always telling us, emailing us, stopping us in the street, telling us they've seen this show, and that's actually pretty cool. We didn't intend that it was going to be that widely received. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the SynqUp.
Thanks, everybody.